Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, souls, desolators, peasants, vassals, minions, useless eaters. And that's actually a term used by Henry Kissinger, who I'm going to talk about today. And so that is the topic. Welcome, I'm a useful idiot. And today I want to talk about this new essay that Henry Kissinger posted in the Wall Street Journal. And of course, Henry Kissinger is an insider's insider. And when he talks, we need to listen because he's telling us something. And this seems to be a regular event. Every several years, Henry Kissinger posts a new essay about the New World Order, one of his favorite topics. And he makes no bones about it. And in fact, this new article is called Henry Kissinger on the Assembly of a New World Order. And the subtitle, quote, "The concept that has underpinned the modern geopolitical era is in crisis," unquote. And he goes on to discuss his overview of where we are in the world and as far as this new world order. And I've kind of gravitated towards the term world governance because it seems like it's less loaded, particularly with a lot of fringe elements embracing and talking about the New World Order in a lot more hyperbolic terms. But anyway, I attached another critique of this new essay below, where the author discusses the idea that Kissinger here is discussing some aspects of the New World Order that are crumbling, but I actually think there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's a lot more to it than this struggle. Certainly, Henry Kissinger brings up the fact that Libya and Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Caliphate, and then these new tensions with Russia and China are sort of slowing the New World Order down. But his nuances and descriptions belie a lot more going on than that. So let's go through this new essay. This can end up being a little longer video because I want to go through all these points and discuss a little bit the implications. So Kissinger brings up the post-World War II era when, quote, "the U.S. identified its own rise with the spread of liberty and democracy and credited these forces with an ability to achieve just and lasting peace," unquote. Well, first of all, it's kind of interesting to couch things in those sort of terms because we know now from the real history, the exposure of real history and real events, that the idea that post-World War II world is about the United States spreading liberty and democracy to achieve lasting and just peace is really a smokescreen for other activities, including empire building, which Henry Kissinger is well aware of as he goes through the rest of this essay. And he talks about there's two views: the European view, which is competitive and maintains a balance of power, and then supposedly this American view, which is a peaceful compromise using common sense. I don't think anybody, once again, looks at the world of U.S. foreign policy and thinks about peaceful compromise and common sense. So once again, we get this smokescreen about what the basic moral fabric of this so-called New World Order is. And he goes on to say, quote, "The spread of democracy was therefore the overarching goal for the international order," unquote. And that's the overriding tool was the idea of the spread of democracy, but the actual spread of democracy is certainly not the overarching goal, as we've seen in all these states that the United States has meddled in. And then Kissinger goes on to say, quote, "Free markets would uplift individuals and enrich societies," unquote. So there's another smokescreen about the realities of what this so-called New World Order has created. We do not have free markets. First of all, they are crony capitalist markets, and he's well aware of that. And we also know that certainly it uplifts certain individuals, but as societies go, it doesn't enrich societies. It enriches certain classes. And so Let's go on from there. Then he goes on to say, quote, this effort to establish world order has in many ways come to fruition, unquote. So I felt like that was one of the most revealing things in this essay right off the bat, is basically Henry Kissinger's declaring that for the most part, the New World Order is here. And that's fairly startling. And he couches it in terms of the American hegemony through the post-World War II era of the 20th century, and now this new globalized world in the 21st century. These are all topics I've covered quite a bit myself. So he goes on from there and says that, quote, a global and financial networks, global communication and financial networks operate in real time, unquote. So there we get to the heart of things. He talks about this effort to establish a world order has in many ways come to fruition. And then he talks about the global communications and financial networks are now operating in real time, letting us know that essentially, as we knew, the global communications networks and the surveillance society and the financial sector that has co-opted the government and runs our foreign policy is what the world governance is all about. So that's an important clause there. Then we go on from there. Quote, the years from 1948 to the turn of the century marked a brief moment in human history when one could speak of an incipient global world order composed of American idealism and traditional European concepts of statehood and balance of power, unquote. So there he spells out that this New World Order was the driving force in the post-World War II years and the World War II years, for that matter, in most of the 20th century, and this drive for the American hegemony. And he credits that with this brief foray into a world order, which he feels is having some struggles right now. And I also thought it was interesting that he thought that what the New World Order is doing now is combining American idealism and then these European concepts of statehood and balance of power. So basically wielding state power, wielding military force, and then tempering it with this American exceptionalism, a weird, kind of a weird worldview from my standpoint. So, and he goes on to be very critical of the disunity in the Eurozone and in these Middle Eastern failed states. And so that's the gist of this idea that there's a crumbling going on in the New World Order. I don't really take away the idea that there's a crumbling going on in the New World Order as much as these are speed bumps. So Kissinger talks about the resistance to the more binding elements of financial unity, banking unity, regulatory unity of the Eurozone is what they're pushing for now. And then to take care of all these Middle East failed states. And that for him is lip service, because he knows very well the forces that unleashed what's going on in the Middle East, because he was there in the very beginnings of these problems. So then we go on from there. Quote, the order established and proclaimed by the West stands at a turning point, unquote. So that's a very interesting statement as well, basically sounding like a Roman emperor, the order established and proclaimed by the West. So this is definitely a world governance system, a hegemony that's declared and proclaimed by the West. And Kissinger's now declaring is at a turning point, which is arguably so. There seems to be a global awareness. We seem to be reaching a crisis stage as far as the spread of regional conflicts and then the spread of transnational governments, the breakdown of sovereignty. All of these things go hand in hand as an obvious turning point. So he goes on from there, quote, the clash between the international economy and the political institutions that ostensibly govern it also weakens the sense of common purpose necessary for a world order. The economic system has become global while the political structure of the world remains based on the nation state. That's a very, very, very important clause. He's talking about the clash we see now between the international economy, or the global transnational corporations and the political institutions. And he even says that ostensibly govern, and so he's recognizing the fact that these corporate entities do run most of the world, certainly the Western economic system, and they are constantly clashing with these political systems, and will eventually supersede all of them. And that's what these trade agreements are about. But also saying that this clash, this resistance by political institutions and the citizens weakens the sense of common purpose necessary for this world order. And then the kicker, like I say, the economic system has become global while the political structure of the world remains based on the nation state. That is the key statement in this whole essay, talking about the globalized economic system. The corporations are pushing for this one world governance, and the political structures are still based on the nation state. And this points out very, very clearly that they consider the nation state to be an obsolete institution. So let's go on from there. Then we have, he goes on to say, quote, the international order thus faces a paradox. Its prosperity is dependent on the success of globalization, but the process produces a political reaction that often works counter to its aspirations, unquote. So once again, it extends the idea that I just talked about, where they now have a paradox. The prosperity of these corporations, these transnationals, depends on more and more globalization, more breakdown of sovereignty, more breakdown of world regulatory systems, and more advantages for transnational corporations. But they're getting this political reaction, which is causing a problem. So that's another focal point of this essay by Kissinger. Is not only is the New World Order here, is what he's saying, but we are now going to encounter this natural political reaction and reaction of the citizenry to the fact that this new world order, this new world governments, this new financial empire around the globe is becoming more and more obvious. Kissinger goes on to talk about the third failing is the absence of an effective mechanism for the great powers to consult and possibly cooperate on the most consequential issues. But then he goes on to point out, of course, that we have a record number of transnational organizations like the UN to deal with these issues, but for some reason he's thinking it's a failing that we don't have a more effective mechanism and something that moves a little quicker, I would imagine. And he goes on to say, quote, the nature and frequency of these meetings works against the elaboration of long-range strategy. So that's rather cryptic. He's obviously talking about a transnational, some new transnational entity that can lay out a long-range strategy, one unified long-range strategy, and that way we won't be dealing with all these national, regional issues that keep popping up, and the places like the UN being used as a forum for that. Something a little more of a strong umbrella over the global community seems to be what's being implied. So then we go on from there. He goes, quote, the penalty for failing will be not so much a major war between states, though in some regions this remains possible, unquote. And that one stuck out for me because I'm one of those few who doesn't use this World War III mantra all the time and thinks there's, and I don't think there's going to be a big showdown between the United States and China, the United States and Russia, or anything approaching a World War III scenario. And this seems to agree in Kissinger talking about there will not so much be a major war between states. But these regional conflicts will continue to go on. And that's one of the things that I've held to my view is that we will not have these large conflicts because there's too many assets to be damaged. There's too much globalization. There's too much interconnection. And therefore, the cash cow will now be these regional conflicts with native armies that will be equipped and trained and will be cash cows of their own, and then a global network of special forces. But anyway, I go off on a tangent. So let's get back to Kissinger. Then he finishes up on this one and says, quote, The contemporary quest for world order will require a coherent strategy to establish a concept of order within the various regions and to relate these regional orders to one another. The domination of a region by one country militarily, even if it brings the appearance of order, could produce a crisis for the rest of the world. So that seems to be targeted at what are called rogue regimes, and at this juncture they probably consider a country like Russia a rogue regime. But this whole idea that the various regions will have to have their order, new world order system put on them, and a lot of this probably has to do with the WTO and the IMF as well, and these systems of loans, and that's another way that these regional orders are created and that are interconnected on an international level. And so then Kissinger goes on to say, quote, to play a responsible role in the evolution of a 21st century world order, the U.S. must be prepared to answer a number of questions for itself, unquote. And that's where we get to the real bottom line. It's not as cryptic as some pundits seem to be pointing out. Basically, there's going to be a lot of gray areas, certainly legally and morally, the United States is going to indulge in if it's going to play a, quote, responsible role in the evolution of a 21st century world order. So he goes into posing a number of those questions, and it shows that, once again, the United States will be required to act unilaterally and use questionable policies. And, of course, we're seeing that now because the United States is having to work with all sorts of bad actors in convenience, moments of convenience and opportunism in a lot of these conflicts in North Africa, in the Middle East. And Kissinger goes on to say the U.S. will require an approach balancing global and regional issues together, and once again, couching all these events like the ones in Ukraine in a bigger picture of U.S. empire and U.S. hegemony. And Kissinger finishes with this essay and says, quote, the affirmation of America's exceptional nature must be sustained, unquote. So in other words, the empire must prevail. And like I say, this is nothing new. Thanks to the work of the legendary Deb Truth, very good close friend of mine and a former YouTube pundit in her own right. Many of you will remember her. She supplied me not only with this Kissinger essay, but with some background material. And so I can now point out that we have this pattern with Kissinger keeping us posted all along about this world governance, this new world system, this new elite umbrella that rules the world now, run by transnational corporations. And he has some interesting views as well. One of them is in 2007. I'll provide these clips below in which Kissinger says in America what we have are terrorists. He would call those terrorists those who reject the international system. So that's interesting. We have certain United States groups in surveillance and intelligence that want to keep an eye on people who are interested in sovereign rights and gun rights and the Constitution. And we have Kissinger himself telling us seven years ago that in America he would consider those terrorists who challenge and reject this international system that is already upon us. And also in 2007 he had an interview with Charlie Rose, and he spoke of the fact that in the next 4 or 5 years we will see the emergence of this new international order. So that was 4 or 5 years ago. Now it's been 7 years ago, and we have indeed seen the emergence of the new international order, and that is what he's trying to tell us. He is announcing that it is upon us. He's looking around. He's pointing out what the last obstacles are, and giving us an overview of exactly what this new world order, new world governance system is. And he even said we will see it in the next 4 or 5 years. It will make itself known. Then in 2009, in January 2009, New York Times, Kissinger had another essay. This one was called, quote, the chance for a new world order, unquote. So I see a theme here. At least Kissinger doesn't beat around the bush. He just comes out and calls it the new world order. And he was saying then, after the financial collapse, 2008 collapse, caused global disillusionment with U.S. management, and the American prescription for an unchallenged world financial order. And that is exactly what he calls it in this article, unchallenged world financial order. So once again, telling us exactly what the nature of this world governance is. And he also mentions the alternative to a new international order is chaos. And so he knows that the international order is necessary in order to control the chaos, but he is also the one who came out and said that we have to have a situation of chaos so that the world citizenry or the American citizenry will demand order. And he pointed out very accurately that if the American citizens saw United States troops in the streets, they would react very badly. But you have to create a situation in which American citizens demand U.S. troops in the streets, and then this chaos becomes a functional tool. And in 2009, he also called for a new Bretton Woods financial agreement, and he heralded the incoming Obama administration, amazingly enough. And he said that then, in 2009, quote, "The extraordinary impact of the president-elect on the imagination of humanity is an important element in shaping a new world order," unquote. So he knew that having a president like Barack that gave people this new hope for some hope and change, and what we got was no hope for any change. And he knew that that was a powerful element at the very beginning of the Obama administration to facilitate the new world order that we see emerging now. And he talked about political and economic systems can be harmonized by one international political regulatory system, and that's what we see with these trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership. And then he also talked about two, shrinking economic units to a size manageable by existing political structure. When he says economic units, he's talking about sovereign states, and this ties into this idea that we've discussed many times on A Useful Idiot channel, breaking things down into smaller units that are more manageable and can be undermined, and their political structures can be undermined by transnationals. So he spells that out. And then another thing that's interesting about Kissinger in 2009 is he also echoed something that I've also seen, that is, quote, "The role of China in a new world order is equally crucial. A relationship that started on both sides is essentially a strategic design to constrain a common adversary has evolved over the decades into a pillar of the international system," unquote. So China is a pillar of the international system. As I've always said, they are the model for the new world order. The system that they have is actually a blueprint for what we will see internationally, not so much what we see in the United States. And at some point, we could actually see China involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership if that becomes a reality. I could very easily see that. And then more recently, in 2013, which I'll attach below, Kissinger did an interview, and he was predicting then that there would be an Iran nuclear agreement in 6 months, and that seems to be coming true. And then he talked about that China would have a period of adjustment with the population moving from the rural to the urban areas and expanding their political consciousness. And that's something we've also seen unfolding. And also says that China will be non-confrontational on the big issues, and we've also seen this as well. They've been very cooperative in this era of economic calamity around the globe. And he talked about Ukraine as part of a new strategic pattern, and he was saying that 6 months ago. And he also talked about Syria, and that Assad must be removed, and that the unnatural borders must be addressed. So once again, 6 months ago, he was already talking about the Sykes-Picot borders in this area in the Middle East. Those border issues need to be readdressed, and he ought to know because he's the man behind these large geopolitical moves. And so we see Kissinger on a trajectory over many, many, many years discussing the New World Order. It goes back much even further than I've discussed, but now we see him again in the 21st century, once again popping up and expressing in very, very clear terms what is happening with one of his favorite topics, and certainly a favorite topic in the world of the internet, and that is the New World Order. So you don't really need to go much further than Mr. Kissinger. And I'll finish with two more quotes from Kissinger from this 2013 interview. He says that, quote, "An international order can be permanent only if its participants have a share not only in building it but also in securing it," unquote. So that's a big clue in that not only is all these nations going to be proxies and puppets for this New World Order, but they will be also participating in securing it. And that goes hand in hand with the United States foreign policy of creating all these native armies all over the globe, these special forces, training and arming them and working with them in most of the countries in the world now. And then the most interesting one for me was, quote, "We must learn to operate within the attainable and be prepared to pursue ultimate ends by the accumulation of nuance," unquote. Sounds like a very cryptic statement that he finishes with in this latest 2014 New World Order essay. But I actually think it's quite clear that he talks about going ahead and pushing forth in those areas that needed to be completed to create this corporate world governance system. And those things operate within what is attainable, he says, and continue to pursue their ultimate ends, which is total corporate world governance by the accumulation of nuance. Very interesting turn of phrase by essentially, once again, continuing to orchestrate all these events and activities that facilitate this corporate governance, but do it in increments and in such a nuanced way that, as we saw through the 20th century in a lot of ways, before anybody realizes it, it's too late because it's already happened. And I think that's the big message I take away from this new Kissinger essay, is that it's too late. It's already happened. The transnational corporate governance is here, the fabled New World Order. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.